Hello, everyone. Can't believe we are almost at the end of our conference. Thank you so much for joining us for our final speaker session, which will consist of a keynote address followed by a moderated Q&A section. Please use this event platform to submit your questions for Morgan and upvote any questions that you would like asked. It is my pleasure to introduce all of you to our wonderful moderator for this session, my good friend and right-hand woman, Sarah Smurthwaite. Sarah is a second-year full-time MBA candidate and the outgoing Executive Vice President of the Women's Business Connection at UCLA Anderson. She is pursuing technology management after graduation, and I am so excited to turn it over to her. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. Very excited to be here. We'd now like to welcome Morgan Mercer to the stage for our final keynote. Morgan Mercer is the founder of the immersive enterprise training company, Vantage Point. Vantage Point's training platform leverages standalone virtual reality in conjunction with machine learning and artificial intelligence. It offers training modules focused on soft skills development, including workplace harassment training, anti-racism, and diversity and inclusion training. Vantage Point is one of the only 24 Black women-run companies to receive VC funding of over $1 million. In addition to Vantage Point, Morgan Mercer is also the founder of Taboo Table Talk, a card game created to help break the stigma around the complex social issues that filter in and out of our interactions every day and shift cultural norms. Morgan was recognized by The Riveter as one of the top 16 female founders and CEOs in Los Angeles, profiled by Forbes, CNN, and the Business Insider as a groundbreaking female founder, and named one of the top 10 female tech innovators in history by Tech Radar. And she was listed as the top female in tech in Los Angeles. So please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Morgan. Thank you so much for being here today, Morgan.
Thank you for having me. Hello all and welcome to Velocity 2021. I am so honored to be presenting to a room of such strong, incredible, and inspiring women. You will all be the change of today, tomorrow, this year, next year, this decade, and the future. Congratulations for embarking on this path. You are choosing to spend your days, your future, creating, building, and shaping the future just by opting into life. I am so happy to share the next 45 minutes with you here today, and I'm so excited about what you're going to dream and create in your lifetimes. My name is Morgan Mercer, and I'm the founder and CEO of Vantage Point, and the company I started, Vantage Point, leverages virtual reality for soft skills training in enterprise companies. We were founded under the belief that while technology can cause apathy, immersive technology can drive empathy and fundamentally make the world more human. Our vision at Vantage Point is to build an inclusive future that represents real-world diversity in culture, ideology, background, and innovation. And we do this by developing emerging technologies for good that unite, inspire, create shared perspective, build empathy, and show people the agency we have in creating positive environments in the workplace and in societies in which we operate and live. Our first beat in doing this is to leverage virtual reality to train people on the EQ-driven and soft skills that matter by teaching things that have to be felt to be resonant, that cannot be explained, yet impact the well-being of every single person. The topics we teach are inarguably consequential for companies from financial and emotional standpoints, and there is no denying the impact that bias, harassment, and conversely self-awareness and empathy and shared accountability have on the effectiveness of a workforce. With Vantage Point, we immerse individuals into real-life experiences and situations of harassment, anti-racism, and bias and discrimination. Because virtual reality and other technologies let you, as a leader, a manager, and individual contributor, experience different situations from different perspectives, and importantly, feel what it's like to be in other people's shoes and to feel what it's like to be navigating tricky interactions from different perspectives. So for example, in our training, the photorealistic characters will make eye contact with you. And the feedback that we hear from employees at clients' training session is that this type of experiential training is eye-opening. And from there, from building empathy, we can develop the skills to identify and address problematic behaviors. I believe immersive mediums are the next step, which will create direct relationships and build empathy that transcends beyond any existing platform-based network. My vision and the goal of Vantage Point is a world in which all people, excuse me, are empowered with the ability to make decisions about their communities, and where all communities are fully engaged in the vital task of shaping our collective future. Some of you in the summit today might have ever felt nervous speaking up, making decisions, guiding direction, or leading a team. Some of you might have spent your lives wondering if you could, in fact, build something consequential. Some of you might have felt nervous sharing your voice. And believe it or not, I've had many of these same conversations with myself. I don't have to anymore, but when I would step into rooms, when I would step into conferences or step into an opportunity to speak in front of an audience such as today, I would have to tell myself the affirmation, my voice and my thoughts are important. And I would have internal conversations with myself, giving myself a pep talk before I'd suggest ideas in meetings. It's very easy to have these thoughts and feelings as a woman in today's day and age. And the numbers don't lie. The data shows that women will only apply to a job if they hit 100% of the requirements, whereas men only have to hit a percentage of the job requirements to feel like they are qualified, which means that men who are underqualified will oftentimes feel that they are qualified or even overqualified, and women who are more qualified than their male counterparts won't apply for jobs at all. Women don't negotiate. Women will stop raising their hands in STEM-related courses in high school because they feel self-conscious. This is when women first begin to drop out of their career paths, and the drop-off rates only continue to skyrocket in university. And ironically, STEM-related careers are the careers that pay the most, pay gap aside. When I was first fundraising for my company for our first funding round, we've now received a couple of funding rounds, it actually felt so defeating to search Crunchbase companies that were in a similar space and similar industries so I could look through their investors only to see male founder names over and over again. All of the female founders I saw had male co-founders, as if so much of their existence within the space was validated by the coexistence of a man. And most of the companies with female founders look like they were in the B2C market, and markets that typically sell to and hyper-focus on female consumers. It was as if men could create products that both women and men could use, but women were only allowed to create products for other women. We have to change this. When I would walk into the room of so many conferences, private events, etc., I would have to calm my nerves. I would always know that more often than not, I would be walking into a room full of men, and I would be the only person there who looks like me, race aside. I would be the only one or one of the only women in the room. And it feels uncomfortable to walk into a room and be the elephant in the room, right? Nobody else seems to notice that you don't fit in except for you. And the discomfort that comes from being the only person, the only woman, the only minority in a room, and feeling like the odd person out is often enough of a mental barrier to keep women and minorities from trying to enter rooms historically barred from them at all. We have to change this because you all need to be in those rooms. My awareness of the lack of female, minority, and LGBTQ recognition didn't start after I started my company. I remember one time, years and years and years ago, that I actually went to eat lunch with a friend at one of the top technology companies in their offices in New York City. And in a section of their office where they had their communal library, they had floor-to-ceiling murals of famous technologists and historians painted on the walls. Every single one of them were men. I asked my friend why, finding it curious, and he said he didn't even realize it until I said something, and he had worked there for years. It was as if they couldn't note a single female that was consequential enough to be up there, and I remember seeing this as being a sneaky way to reinforce what society so bluntly tells us, that we are not good enough, that we cannot create, build, and achieve, and that we can never be consequential. But I'm here, and all of the other speakers are here today to remind you that you can. Let's take a bigger step back, because these issues, the ones that we're touching on today, and that you will continue to charge forth on in the rest of your lifetime, span so deeply and so broadly. We know that today doesn't look like yesterday, and 2020 has unraveled in ways that nobody has expected. The world, even today, post Black Lives Matter and in the midst of Stop Asian Hate, doesn't look like it did 5 years ago. We've seen and heard movements of people rising and raising their voices around issues that we've historically ignored, from the lack of diversity across every sector, to pervasive inequitable attitudes, to racism, systemic oppression across the world, to gun violence, to harassment, to immigration and criminal justice reform. all the way to the in the daylight murderings of members of the Asian and Black communities. We are at a pivotal moment where we have the ability to truly shape the future of equity and inclusion for all. These conversations weren't going on a year ago at the scale that they're happening now. This is partially because we have opted historically not to engage and not to pay attention. COVID-19 forced us all to sit back, listen, watch, and engage. And as the world reopens, don't lose that spark. Don't lose the engagement. Don't lose the passion. Keep listening, keep demanding change, keep pushing for progress, and keep your sights set on what the future can look like, even when we see the reality of what it is today. What does equity look like? It obviously looks better than it did 5 years ago, but it still looks pretty bad. According to the World Economic Forum, we're actually 202 years away from gender equity, and that doesn't account for the racial divide, or even the most recent violence that we're uncovering and watching around the Asian population. Racism and violence that has only increased 1,200% since COVID-19, and that has streamed across the headlines of the news in the past weeks and months across all of the United States. COVID-19 has laid bare the inequalities and injustices people face globally, and the collective response to the pandemic has raised a few of the disparities stopping us from cultivating an equitable and just world, i.e. Black Lives Matter, lack of medical discrimination, unjust job rates, loss rates in low-income communities. And because of these issues, gender equality, racial justice, LGBTQ plus rights, disability rights, and economic justice must all be front and center, because these are human rights. Beyond this, we've seen bans on hijab in France, issues with immigration at our border, and more problems than we, any of us, millennial, Gen Z, could ever dream to face in our teens, our 20s, and heading into adulthood. COVID-19 has also further deepened the racial divide between us, driving us to point fingers at each other. But we can use this as a point of unity, to unite together, to look within, to challenge ourselves, to question how we can be better, how we can show up better, and to hold ourselves and each other accountable for our actions and behaviors and for being the best versions of ourselves. All people, regardless of their race, gender, sexual identity, or orientation and abilities, must have access to justice and equality. As a society, we must come together to end all forms of violence and abuse and promote strong institutions and inclusive leadership. We will create a more equitable and just world, but to do that, we have to, as Sheryl Sandberg says, lean in. We need to be active. We need to be engaged. We need to be committed. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, 5 billion people, worldwide lacked access to justice, and nearly 1.5 billion people had an unresolved justice issue. The COVID-19 global response needs to be people-centered and fair to deliver more equitable and just outcomes for everyone and prevent undoing progress. Marginalized groups and vulnerable communities, including women, the LGBTQ population, people of color, and people with disabilities, are disproportionately impacted by issues of equity and justice, largely due to poverty, discrimination, public prejudice, and lack of education and literacy. These barriers prevent them from participating fully in their societies and put them at risk of further marginalization. You, I, we can all make the world more equitable. There is nothing that will grow critical and diverse leadership skills better than putting people into candid and complex conversations around the issues of diversity and inclusion. They will experience and develop crucial skills like courage, connecting head and heart, listening deeply, navigating through ambiguity and complexity, and being able to sort out one's intent from impact. These skills, honed through inclusive partnership practices, bring a fresh perspective to all of today's business issues. Although these conversations are challenging to have, remember the invaluable outcome. These conversations will offer you and the participants of the conversations you have them with a new outlook and perspective on topics that can never be measured, can only be felt through its impact. Don't run from these conversations because they stem the most growth that will impact you and how you interact with others and how others interact with others for years to come. Share more, because when it comes to exploring assumptions and inequities, I think it's better to be on the side of oversharing than undersharing. In my case, when I was traveling with a friend, I unknowingly said something prejudiced to her, and because of the incident, we were able to have a conversation. She approached me head on. I wouldn't have had to deal with the consequences of that decision and learn from it if it were never to have happened. But even though it was stressful, and even though it was facing myself head on in the mirror, it was a great way to clarify what I believed and why I believed it, and to connect with other people who've considered or will consider similar issues. We should question our assumptions more and avoid opting out. Sometimes we disqualify ourselves, taking the easier path because we don't believe that something will be possible or easy. If we don't opt out, we can bring out the real no's and find out that our assumptions don't match up with a more equitable reality. The next principle that I live off of is that people will not always tell you what you can't do. They'll tell you a reflection of what they believe that they can't do. So focus blindly on your vision and ignore everybody. Your limitation is the belief system that you hold. I often hear how people have thought about things. Everybody thinks about things, but it's not about thinking about them. It's about actually doing them. And it's about what you will do to do it. So blindly focus on your vision, regardless of your gender, your ethnicity, your background, your skill set, your previous work history, your industry, your timing, or any of the other excuses and reasons that you can come up with not to, and that the world can come up with for you not to. It doesn't matter how crazy, persistent, out there, or aggressive that you have to be, because you will need to be all of those things. And by the way, they're not bad, but you will also find a way to make it happen. We can learn more about these issues and we can help work on those issues. There are plenty of things that need to be addressed within the workforce, within the world more broadly, and it can feel pretty overwhelming. So maybe pick one or two areas that you can develop and grow in this year: gender equity, work-life, globalization, and learn a lot about those areas. That's how my company Vantage Point grew from tackling sexual harassment to now moving into anti-racism, discrimination, bias, and looking at other areas like fat phobia, Islamophobia, etc. Read, watch movies, ask questions, have candid and honest conversations, and withhold from feeling defensive to engage in conversations authentically and from a place of connection. And a bit of general advice: when you don't see a face that looks like you the next time you walk into a room or want to enter into a room, whether it be a Zoom room or in real life, give yourself a pep talk in the bathroom and then walk into the room like you deserve to be there, because you do. When you question sharing your opinion in a meeting, remind yourself that your voice, your thoughts are important. The next time someone interrupts you, kindly and firmly say, "I would appreciate finishing my statement," or "What I was in the middle of saying was ... The next time you're scared to ask for what you want, remember that this may be what you want, but because society has conditioned us to ask for less than we deserve, you should actually ask for more than what you want. Your stretch goal is what you actually deserve. Don't be afraid to question things, gather data points and make a decision, and ground your asks in data points and in numbers. If you're accepting an offer of any sort, ask your male counterparts what they received and don't target anything less. Another secret: you don't have to know what you're talking about in order to begin. If you don't know, throw yourself in with no cares about what anyone else thinks and learn. Ask for help. Find mentors. The fastest and easiest way to learn anything is through and from others. If you don't know where to find mentors, look on LinkedIn, because that's what I did. I was fortunate enough to be mentored by the EVP of MWWPR when I was your age, and this is a PR firm with 8 office locations across the US and Europe. This happened not because he reached out and found me, but because I identified him as someone I wanted to learn from on LinkedIn, and I cold messaged him asking him for an hour of his time to share his wisdom and guidance. I've actually done this numerous times through creating spreadsheets and cold outreaching to the top industry thought leaders in virtual reality on LinkedIn to ask for 20 minutes of their time. This is how I learned about virtual reality, and this is actually how I broke into the space to start my company. I tracked who replied, and I followed up every few days to every single week for those who didn't, until I either got a yes or a no. Don't be afraid of being annoying or of bothering others in pursuit to pursuing your goals. One of my favorite metaphors is that life is like a game of, it's like playing trick or treat, right? Somebody says no and you go and knock on the next door until somebody says yes. Use your frustration with the world's problems to fuel you to create solutions. Follow your curiosity. even if it doesn't make sense. I used to be obsessed with the non-linear trajectory of successful people. If you decide to be brave and live for yourself, which I hope all of you do, you will likely make choices that others question. Ignore their doubts. Choosing to live abroad or go to work for a startup instead of a corporation and to travel the world alone taught me some of my biggest lessons that I use daily. And they taught me the lessons I needed to start my first company at 23 and to be 26 and now leading it. Embrace the no. When we were first starting, I was pitching press outlets left and right, and nobody wanted to cover us because it was actually before #MeToo, not a single publication. But soon we ended up gaining coverage in a few small outlets, which only fueled more coverage. And ever since our first 3 to 4 articles, all of our press has been inbound. We've been featured in over 135 global news publications, including CNN 3 times, Forbes 3 times, The Economist, Bloomberg, etc. Success is a snowball effect, and starting off is always the hardest part. If a relationship or a friendship isn't serving you, cut it out. Your time is too limited and valuable for people who aren't helping you grow in some capacity, whether it be personally, professionally, or individually. Guard your circle and surround yourself with people who support you. People will project their fears from themselves onto you. One of the most interesting things to learn is who will actually support you when rubber hits the road. Don't take advice or guidance at face value, and don't let advice or guidance that's meant to help you discourage you. Look inwardly because you already know what you need to do, but do find a strong network of other women who can support you and a strong support system that you can rely on and that you can lean on to ask questions, to be authentic about your experience, and to help as you grow on your path and on your journey. And by the way, it's okay to have imposter syndrome. Most successful people I know have it or have had it, both men and women. Ignore it and keep after your goals. Do things that put you outside of your comfort zone. If you are truly pursuing your dreams, you will never truly be comfortable. Progression and trajectory inherently mean that you have to keep growing, and you will oftentimes grow into the role as you need to, and never before. Embrace the growth. Look at each challenge as an opportunity to change. Reflect on your actions and the ways that you can do and be better, and then put them into action in the moment of. Speak up for what you believe in and support each other. Find allies. Some of my greatest allies and biggest advocates have actually been men. And find people who are vested in your success and who are willing to coach you. Have a strong support system. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Friends, advisors, mentors, allies of other women, especially as you continue on your journey. And challenge others. Ask for what you deserve. A few tips of advice as you all embark on your journeys of leadership and growth and into the workforce, coming from the space of HR and D&I. Please hold other people accountable through numbers. Pass them on to others, right? Ask questions. What does the diversity within the company look like? How do you measure feelings of inclusion? What's the diversity, not only across teams, but also at the various leadership levels? Change things as you move into different companies. Maybe if you have the opportunity to start your own startup or to inform other startups, change things from a culture fit to a values fit, right? Culture is built off of the context of being something that has been historically homogenous. What are your values? Shift it from a culture fit to a value fit when you screen for candidates. Define your values, know what your values are, and know what the company that you're applying for, know what their values are too. Make sure that everybody's included. That's everybody's job. If you're in a meeting and you see that another colleague isn't saying something, isn't being heard, call on people, solicit their feedback, solicit their engagement, make it a point to make sure that people are included in the conversation. Make sure that the organizations that you work for or start have diversity at the top, and make sure that you also recognize your own biases. As many times as I've experienced discrimination or racism or various other things, it doesn't mean that I am free from bias, and it doesn't mean anyone else is free from bias either. Commit to looking in the mirror and recognizing your biases, and make sure that you hold other people accountable to theirs as well. If you're entering into a company and you're trying to launch an initiative or something new, a new project, make sure that you get internal buy-in from stakeholders and learn to create champions. If you can create champions behind your project, things will go over much smoother, especially as you're trying to commit to making change and progress and change in progress that is so badly needed. Because having allies is a bridge to having advocacy inside of your organization. The last note I'll say in this area is to innovate and don't adapt. Systems we had don't work. They never worked, even when we had them. Rethink the programs that you guys are informing and influencing and creating, and make sure that they are built based off of equity, not equality, built based off of meeting people where they are at. Equity and equality are two inherently different things. Equality is giving somebody access to the same resources, whereas equity is recognizing where a person is at and giving them the resources to bring them up to the same level of opportunity as others. So, for example, what this can look like in terms of programs as we continue forth in the world in a post-pandemic world is looking at programs surrounding maternity leave or supporting a home work environment for employees. Some employees don't have access to the same environments and office settings as others. Looking at things like policies around flex schedules, supporting parents or supporting, your friends, your colleagues who maybe have kids at home, technology and hardware needs. So when you're going forth into the workforce, either starting your own companies or interviewing at other companies, ask them how they've adopted their policies in a post-pandemic world and ask them what their policies were before. How I've applied the advice I'm giving you, because it's a lot of advice. Of course, I've shared a little bit about what my company does and what our mission is. We actually started with anti-sexual harassment training, and we have already expanded into unconscious bias training and anti-racism training. Many people would reply to me when I was first starting out, and they would say, great timing. It was as if everything it seemed like we did in just under 6 months, or everything that we did always happened to be right on the dot in terms of timing. We had pilot partners, then early customers, first 36 press outlets, and now 10, in what seemed like a period of 6 months to a year. But let me clarify, it actually took me years to get to the point where we had done what it looked like we had done in such a short period of time. And it was not a coincidence, and it was not purely timing, because nothing in life is. Blindly focus on your vision. What does it mean when I say that? Because I've said it a few times now. I mean that as an oxymoron, right? Because how do you blindly focus on something that you can see? I'm going to continue to repeat it so that you can start to get a sense of what I mean. As a biracial female from the South and a 2-time survivor of sexual violence, I grew up in a very interesting environment in North Carolina. I lived in an echo chamber, but I never realized it. And it wasn't until I actually made the ignorant joke that I referenced earlier to a friend that I was questioned for the first time in my life about my belief system. And that reflected to the way that I influenced my environment around me and ultimately my decision to start my company. It actually took me hurting someone close to me to come back to one key realization. Unless a problem directly impacts you or someone close to you, you will rarely take the time to learn and understand what someone else is going through. It has to impact you directly or indirectly, for you, for me, for anybody, to do the hard work of looking in the mirror and admitting that we've potentially had behaviors or beliefs or views or taken actions that have been harmful to others. It's hard work to do. That moment etched in history the mission I would embark upon for the rest of my life, but I didn't know it yet. I moved to DC directly after Italy, where I became increasingly consumed with understanding the world around me, economic disparity, gender parity, marginalized communities, subliminal gender stereotyping. I became obsessed. And then I had the pleasure of befriending Sarah Elizabeth Dill, who's the former director of criminal justice standards at the American Bar Association. She was giving a TED Talk in Monaco around women as weapons of war in November of 2016, and I flew to Monaco to sit alongside her as her VIP guest. And at the private speaker dinner afterwards, what I realized was that nobody, not even the prominent thought leaders, had the ability to identify intervention points, much less note how to actually intervene in an uncomfortable situation. And at the event, I actually wrote on the board, the theme of the TED Talk was, what is your revolution? I wrote that my revolution and my life mission was to reduce societal apathy via technology. I believed that technology could bring us closer together, but it also can make us apathetic. We've seen the shift between social media and how it's made us apathetic pre-pandemic and how it's actually become a platform for using our voice post-pandemic and in a pandemic world. So at the time, I woke up a week later with the idea for this company, Vantage Point, and it consumed me ever since. And that was back in November of 2016. So naturally, I focused blindly on my vision. I actually signed up for Udacity courses. I taught myself how to code on the weekends so that I could attend hackathons for the sole reason of soft pitching the company. I pitched the agency I was working for at the time to let me code a virtual reality experience focused on the subliminal gender stereotyping of women. And they said no. So I took a few more routes. It wasn't until a friend asked me, is this your hobby or is this your company, that I actually decided to fully commit and focus blindly on my vision. And this is when I cold emailed 300 thought leaders in the XR industry on LinkedIn, asking for 15 minutes to learn everything I could. And one of them was Sarah Hill, who is now a good friend of mine, who not only responded, but invited me warmly into the industry. She extended me an invitation as her +1 to a private luncheon at OC4, which is Facebook's Oculus Connect conference. She ended up becoming a member of the first Women in XR Venture Fund cohort alongside me 2 months later. And later on, she's now actually a member of Headstream Accelerator, which is an accelerator program that I judge for and I mentor. At OC4, I was offered a last-minute ticket to virtual reality on the lot. I canceled my flight back to DC. I rerouted to Los Angeles the next day, and I ended up meeting Tony Parisi, who is the global head of AR and VR at Unity Technologies, which is the game engine powering 80% of the world's VR, at the conference, and he became one of my first advisors a week later. I wrote it on the wishing tree for Yoko Ono at a museum in DC, and when the Harvey Weinstein news broke years ago, I commented on Rose McGowan's Instagram posts every hour for a day. She finally answered and she followed me on Instagram, and she still follows me on Instagram. So naturally, I then quit my jobs and I moved across the country to start my company. I didn't dip my toes into the water. I literally jumped into the water, and I figured that I had no other option but to swim. Out of the 300 thought leaders, I booked calls with half. And those people were the ones who all ended up sending me both to the Women in XR Venture Fund and Boost VC, which was the accelerator program that we ended up joining via Twitter and email. And I applied to both and got into both. I then moved a second time to San Mateo to start the accelerator program. And fast forward 6 months, I raised a funding round. And I became one of the 24 Black women at the time to have raised over $1 million in VC capital at 23. It took us years and years of blindly focusing on the vision to build something that optically looked like it had only taken me half a year to build. And that was years ago. So I'm now going on 4 years of pursuing this dream. And in last year, 2020, we were listed as Gartner's top 25 enterprise software companies to watch in 2020 and 2021. People, again, will always tell you what you can't do. But again, it is always a reflection of what they believe that they can't do. Amazing things are built by amazing people, plural. So the louder you are about your vision, the more easily you'll find people who align with your vision. Moving into this coming year of 2021, be courageous, be brave. If you do it when nobody else does it, you'll stand out. There's absolutely nothing wrong with standing out. In fact, a lot of times, standing out from the crowd is what will move you ahead. Don't network transactionally. Everyone wants to feel heard, and everyone wants to share what their passions are and what makes them unique and feel heard. Ask people what their passions are. Don't go into conversations asking, what can this person do for me? Because people can sense transactional conversations. Ask what you can do for others, and always try and make the world a better place. Oftentimes, people have experiences, wisdom, and connections you may not even know about, and people will be willing to share if you take an interest in them rather than an interest in what they can do for you. Keep in touch with everyone you meet. You never know when your paths might cross again. And just a little tip, I actually have a list and a spreadsheet of every person that I meet, where I met them, and their email address and their phone number. I hope the women and mentors that you have met through Velocity, the connections that you form, and the support that you feel continue to encourage you on your journey well beyond your time at UCLA. We all have the ability to influence our surroundings and the future, for better or for worse. We all impact the future through the actions we take today and our commitment to self-development and self-awareness. And we've all felt the feelings of isolation, of not being understood, of being impacted negatively in ways that others might not be able to relate. We've all felt what it feels like to share our experience and not be met with empathy. And we are now and will continue to be loud and clear about what we believe, what we deserve, and what our rights are. Our rights to freedom, protection, safety, privacy, and self-expression. As a closing thought, trust in yourself. You got this. You really do. The doors that have opened for me, the kinds of people I'm able to engage with, the opportunities I'm given, like being a mentor and a judge to Headstream Accelerator, backed by Melinda Gates, focused on creating digital spaces that fight against injustices that BIPOC communities endure, being able to be featured in 130 plus global news outlets such as CNN, Greece on video last week, The Guardian, Vogue, Forbes, Business Insider, Inc. Magazine Summit a couple weeks ago, would not be possible if I did not trust in myself. That is the biggest key to unlocking a world of equity. You have a voice, so use it. Own your power, stand in your power, and push forward for more and for what's right with empathy, love, and unbridled bravery. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Morgan. We are so lucky that you're here, and there was so much that I personally resonated with. I know we all need a very strong support system, and this year in particular, I think we've all really learned that, and that we really do need to unite together and be the best version of ourselves that we can be. So thank you once again. That was so insightful, so incredible. A great kind of close to everything. There are some questions that I do want to get to. So the first question I want to bring up is submitted by Michelle Wood. So Michelle asks, before the digital age, leadership principles were often learned from experiences. Now generations have more access to learn from a greater variety of sources. So as a leader for your company, how do you develop leadership in the digital age?
That's a great question, Michelle. Thank you for such a thoughtful question. So what's important for leaders to recognize and to remember is that every person learns differently, and there are a myriad of different resources. And yes, personal experience and real life experience is the best experience, but of course, it's also very costly from an emotional standpoint, and it can be very taxing for people around you. So it's really important to encourage all of your employees, all of your colleagues, et cetera, to do their own self-work and to really have context and have clarity. And so as you brought up, there are plenty of resources. There are books, there are movies, there are so many beautiful infographics that Instagram social media accounts are making. There are different profiles you can follow that literally send out tips on anti-racism daily or backgrounds from the contextual side, looking at sociology and anthropology and how different movements of populations of people actually can influence what we're seeing with things like Stop Asian Hate or Black Lives Matter. So the biggest thing I would say to recognize that people learn differently, and there are a myriad of resources. And the best thing you can do is make sure that your colleagues, your employees are aware of the resources for where they can learn and where they can get information. And you encourage them to read and learn, no matter how they're reading or learning, no matter how they're engaging with the content. The important thing is that they are. So I would say actually break it down and say, here are social media accounts you can follow. Here are weekly newsletters you can sign up for. Here are platforms where they post about maybe the latest protests that are going on or the changes in the regulatory landscape. Here are activists who do a lot of talks or that you can listen to. Here are really great publications that literally have columns dedicated to these things. Here are movies, here are books, and build out basically a resource pool for your employees and just encourage them to commit to choosing one or two things or a few things a week that they're going to do to educate themselves, no matter how they're choosing to engage with the content. Because then as you're learning, once you go into a real life situation, it's about having the space for self-reflection. So even if you're in a real life setting, you can say, okay, now I have this new awareness from this thing that I read that I didn't have before. And I realize that this behavior that I'm either seeing reflected back to me or that I'm reflecting back to the world may be this thing. How can I take what I've learned and respond differently in this moment? And it'll actually help move us faster towards equity in the world.
Yeah, no, that makes great sense. That was a great answer to that. For the next question, it's actually submitted by Anonymous. Oops. But when interviewing for a job, there are often behavioral questions to help figure out fit. So what exactly does that mean if the organization isn't diverse? And how can bias be mitigated in the questions that hiring managers should ask to probe fit?
That's a really, really incredible question. It's a very incredible question. So I think that there are a lot of problematic things with hiring practices in general. What I would say is that when you're asked a question, there's actually, so really great context. We did a webinar with Donna Keynes, who actually published the research behind the gendered VC questions in fundraising practices. And what she found was that men are asked questions basically to respond to how they would succeed, and women are asked questions that basically prime them for ways to respond to failure and strategies to respond to failure. And even though optically they seem like very similar questions, the priming is very different. The context is very different. So even within a question around fit, it's slightly similar, where they're trying to see what your fit is, whether or not you would step into the role and respond in a specific way. And of course, when you have biases that come into play, you're going to be looking out for different things. You're going to be listening for different things. So the thing I would say is reframe the question when somebody asks you a question. If somebody asks you a question around how would you respond to a situation where hypothetically you have to figure out the trade-offs, right, between a few different things, reframe the question before you answer it so that you're coming at it from a way that's stronger. Meaning it's a question that's not necessarily framed for failure or framed from the context of bias. And then I would potentially get ahead and address it head on after you answer the question and say, okay, well, if I were in this situation, I would step back and I would have done X, Y, and Z to ensure that this hadn't happened. In the case that this had happened, I would have done this and this and this. I'm curious from your perspective, what are some ways that you've seen women in leadership positions within your company show up in this specific scenario and handle it well? And what would you be looking for from me in this role, right? So I would actually address it head on and potentially even call attention to, if there's lack of diversity within the company, maybe call attention to that, and ask them what are ways that other people within the role, meaning other women within the role, have responded well, or other women in the role have addressed similar issues. And I would potentially even ask them, you're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. So don't forget that. I would ask the company, how do you invest into the women that you bring into your workforce, your organization, to help grow them from a talent perspective into leadership positions? How do you prepare and equip women with the skills that they need to, to grow within the roles in your company? And I would ask them, what are your diversity and inclusion goals, right? What percentage of leadership do you want to see as being women, female within your company? By what year? What are some of the programs and support structures that you have in place for this? And then I would ask them again, how do you respond to things like failure, or when an employee makes a decision or a judgment call that you actually don't feel like is the right one? How do you mentor them, right? How do you ensure that they're growing? So I think at a high level, that's how I would respond if I were you in a situation like that. And again, you're interviewing a company just as much as they're interviewing you. So don't be scared to ask them questions and see that they're truly committed to it as well. Because the last thing you want to do is get a job that you've been vying for, but then step into a space where you're really not structured or supported in a way that you can grow.
No, that was great. And then I guess the last question we have, because I know we're a little over time, but I think this is really relevant. So you've obviously, this is also submitted by Anonymous, but you've obviously accomplished so much at such a young age, which is very impressive. And this person feels insecure about being the youngest person in the room in a corporate environment. So this person was wondering, how do you handle this challenge?
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? And it's one that evolves over time too. So I will say that now I think everything's like a muscle, right? You flex the muscle. So as you get used to it, it suddenly becomes something that you don't realize as much. But for a really long time, I did, to the point where I actually bought a fake engagement ring at one point, because I wanted to seem older, and I would do my makeup and say like, okay, does this make me look older, right, than I am? It definitely was something that I was very cognizant about. And I'm not going to lie, it is something that I'm aware of. It's not necessarily something that I'm as conscious of from the perspective that it impacts what I do. But for a very long time, I was very, very nervous, right? And I would actually sit there and think like the people in the room with me are twice my age, 3 times my age sometimes. And so it wasn't even that I was the youngest. There's such a large age disparity, that you really can't ignore it. The thing I would say is that what's really helped me is gaining control of my internal chatter, my internal dialogue with myself. So really think through in those times, what are you telling yourself and what's the narrative you're telling yourself about your age? You're young, right? Okay, well, you're young, you're bringing a fresh perspective and innovation. You're young. Okay, well, you have the perspective of having, and it's been shown from a statistical standpoint that millennials, different generations coming into the workforce have very different expectations of companies and of leaders and of culture than previous generations have had. Right. And that is inherently in and of itself a benefit. You are not settling for the status quo. So what's the narrative that you're telling yourself around your age? Because some of the most brilliant companies and inventions and things that have been done from people who were young, who were new, who had no idea what they were doing. And because they could look at the world from a completely different perspective or from a completely different perception, they were able to step into spaces and see things that other people didn't see. And so if you're telling yourself that being young is a weakness or being young is something that, people should be hypercritical of, that's going to make you feel nervous, right? But if you shift that conversation to being young is one of my biggest strengths, right? And because I can see things that other people don't see, because I have a fresh perspective on the world, because I know what future generations are going to be looking for and the things that need to change, and I can see that very clearly, I'm bringing a perspective to this table that not another person, not a single person at this table has. And because of that, not only do I deserve to be sitting in this position, but everybody else should be listening to me. That's a completely different conversation you're having with yourself, and it might potentially help with some of the insecurity. And as you continue to grapple with the voice inside your head, and as you continue to see that play out too, because, it's definitely something I've seen play out where, you'll meet people who are quote unquote young, and just the way they see the world is absolutely brilliant and completely different from how different generations see the world. It'll start to reinforce changing the internal dialogue, and it'll start to get easier over time, even if it's hard right now.
Amazing. That was a great answer and a great way to kind of wrap everything up. Thank you once again, Morgan, for joining, and thank you for kind of those words of wisdom. I think we have a lot of takeaways that we got from your speech. So thank you so much. I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Genevieve to do some closing remarks.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you so much, Morgan. So that concludes our speaker programming for the 2021 Velocity Women's Leadership Summit. I know we are a bit over time. We won't keep you too much longer, but I did quickly want to check back in with our live illustration scribe, Laura, so she could share some of her day's work.
Thanks, Genevieve. Hello, everybody. It's very late here in the UK, so apologies if I look a little bit more tired than I did about 6 hours ago. But I wanted to walk you through quickly so that you can go off and enjoy your Friday evenings some of the illustrations that have been produced today. So just to let you know, they're all at the link below my screen here, and you can find them all there and download them. So we first looked at the workshops this morning. So I had the pleasure of being in all 3. So we had our allyship across genders with an incredible overview of the Beyond Leaning In book. And the key takeaway from here for me was about the importance of allyship. So understanding lived experience, addressing barriers, and making sure that we can have that allyship both upwards, across, and downwards within organisations. We also then looked at moving across the middle of the image, happiness and balance. And a lot of that resonated with me. But the key thing that I took away from this was about timing. So ensuring that we give away our time in order to feel like we have more time, and to be mindful of our mindset when we're approaching our weekends and vacation time, to ensure that we make the most of it and use it more wisely. We then looked at cultivating a leadership presence. So there were things around connecting with ourselves and also others, and managing self-doubt, And one of the great acronyms that I took away from that was the GREAT acronym, which is about having connections that are goal-oriented, real, educate each other within that relationship, assist one another, and also have a task to take away from that conversation. We then had our introduction from Antonio, and we were talking about the challenges of the last year, but also some of the optimism that we have as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what was clear was that we still have an issue with creating an equitable future for women because there's such a big gender pay gap and a gender gap across all sections of society. So Antonio had a really beautiful statement at the end about the solution to this and what Velocity is all about, being about committing to helping one another, to contribute, to create, and to connect. And those themes have underpinned the rest of our day. We then had our first keynote from Martine, who's a force to be reckoned with, and it was incredible to be scribing. So there were 4 key areas here. So it was the career evolution, the theme of forwards, the trans experience, and what next. And a few things and quotes that I wanted to pick out were, looking back is to keep digging the hole, and the importance of constantly moving forward. And Martine said that if she had 1,000 years of life left to live, she would spend it collaborating with others to make the world a better place. And one other quote that really stuck out for me was, if there is no door to opportunity, or opportunity doesn't come knocking, build the door and walk forwards through it. And I think that was the spirit of everything that we talked about on that keynote. We then had our panels. So we had women creating change, women in entrepreneurship, and women leaders in CSR. And again, there were kind of 3 key things that came out of these panels for me. One was the importance of networks and lifting one another up to create change. The second was building your audience, finding your tribe, and working together to work out the message that we need to get out to the community. And also on this kind of CSR front, it's so important to have substantive measures of impact rather than vanity metrics or vanity doing anything. So actually, what are we doing, and is it really helping people? And how can we build things with communities rather than for them? We then had our keynote from Jodie, who had 4 key lessons for us to take away from her experiences at Kaiser. And that was to cultivate relationships, to define your vision, which came up in Morgan's keynote too, to be vulnerable and see vulnerability as a strength, and also to develop resilience and tenacity. And that summed up her experience and talking about her stories through her career. We then had our final keynote from Morgan, who I ran out of space because she had just so many truth bombs, it was unbelievable. But she was talking a lot about the difficulties of being a female co-founder in a space that is predominantly occupied by white men, essentially. And she gave some wonderful advice about how we need to get women in the room, how we need to embrace the moment that we're in currently, and use the learnings that we've had from COVID in order to have a more equitable society for the rest of us. And she was really keen on this idea of our own agency to make change. So you, I, and we can challenge the status quo together. And we need to do that through having difficult conversations. And we talked about this through the medium of VR and what we're doing at Vantage Point. Some of the key bits were about embracing the no, following your curiosity, focusing on your vision, asking for help, using your voice, finding your support system, and guarding your circle. And again, really inspiring for young entrepreneurs out there and female entrepreneurs, of which I count myself one of them. So some of the key takeaways that I want to leave you then, before you go off to your weekend, were these 6 key points that came across the whole of our day. The first one is the importance of connection, collaborating, and creating to evoke change. The second is the importance of allyship in order to leverage that power in order to make change stick. The third is learning from COVID and learning from the lessons that we've seen from the massive inequality across the world in the last year, and how can we build on that to build stronger and more resilient communities. The fourth is moving from this idea of tokenism and tokenistic equality and diversity and inclusion to more substantive impact and an idea of belonging. And the fifth is building with people, not for people. And that came across so strongly across all of our speeches today. And the final one that I want to leave you with, and I implore you to think about this when you leave the session today is we need to move from a moment to a movement. So how can we take velocity and everything you've seen today and turn it into a greater movement rather than just this snapshot in time that we've shared together? But thank you so much for having me. Everything's available at the link below, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for staying with us until midnight your time. And I'm so excited to get those as keepsakes to remember everything that we've learned and experienced today. So to close out the conference, it's my honor to introduce you to Catherine Meister, a second-year full-time MBA candidate and the outgoing Vice President of Velocity Programming for the Women's Business Connection. She is pursuing a career in technology after graduation, and this conference truly could not have happened without her hard work and dedication. So I'm so happy to turn it over to her to wrap us up.
Great. Hi, everyone, and I'll be brief. Thank you for joining us today at the UCLA Anderson Annual Women's Leadership Summit. I hope you feel energized and inspired after listening to all the remarkable leaders who have shared their insights, strategies for success, and so much more with us today. As we just heard from Laura, to name a few, Martine spoke about evolution, moving forward, and breaking gender stereotypes. Jody discussed resilience and finding strength in vulnerability, and Morgan touched on creating an equitable and just world. I'm grateful to all of our speakers and energizers for taking time from their busy lives to guide the next generation of women business leaders along what will surely be exciting and demanding careers. Thank you as well to all of the attendees for taking part in today's conversation. We are all shaping the future for women. Our voices matter, and I hope as you look forward and think about what you learned at this conference today, you will feel the same confidence and exhilaration I do. Some of us will follow in the paths of the entrepreneurs we heard from today. Others will join established organizations in a wide variety of roles. We will all face the challenges of becoming successful leaders, building things and sometimes breaking things down only to rebuild them into more inclusive, equitable, and socially responsible structures. Inevitably, there will be moments of success and moments of failure. What we heard today were stories of courage from women who have become mentors, allies, and sponsors by example. They are telling us not to be afraid to dream, but also reminding us that we can't achieve our dreams without hard work. Find the people, build the skills, and never give up. Last, I want to thank our sponsors, UBS and Fritz Demopoulos, UCLA Anderson class of 1997, along with our executive team members, Joe Baldoff, Elaine Hagan, Heather Crusoe, Jessica Luchenza, Ellie Garby, Pat Godfrey, and many more. And a big shout out to our student leaders, Genevieve Vida, Sarah Smirthwaite, Cindy Gao, Garmina Narang, Sarah Robertson, Laura Kelly, Lori Jung, and Sophia Mirabella. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you over the past year and see this event come to life after all of our hard work. If there was ever a resilient and resourceful team to overcome challenges, this was it. Finally, if you're interested in sending yourself a reminder of the lessons, ideas, or themes you took away from today, we invite you to participate in our quote activity. We will be using the Self Club. A link to the website has been shared in the Q&A section on Cvent and on Slack. When you click into it, you will have the option to write a note to yourself in the future. Choose a date you want to receive the note and then send. The note will arrive in your inbox and at the selected date to remind you of the lessons, ideas, and themes you learned today. So with that, thank you again for spending your Friday with us. We hope that next year we are able to celebrate together in person. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your Friday. Bye, everyone.